Disco delivers affordable, science-backed skincare treatments to your home. The Disco Starter Set helps guys fight oily skin and razor burn and keeps your skin hydrated. I've had great results with it. You'll get 30% off at letsdisco.com/Pacman. The link is down below.
If you've been listening to my podcast for a while, if you've been watching the show for a while, you know that on this show, I try to do a lot of different things, but for our purposes today, I always want to be clear when I tell you that we know something to be true, that we suspect something to be true based on some evidence and data, or that we're just guessing and speculating. We can now move from mere speculation to we can suspect based on early data that the Omicron variant, or the Omicron as some call it, it's actually Omicron, that the Omicron variant, which led to market turmoil over the last couple of weeks, panic everywhere, might actually be less severe in terms of its rate at which it causes severe disease than the Delta variant. That is potentially a very welcome change to this trajectory of the COVID pandemic. Now, I'm going to tell you what is making us suspect that. And I'm going to be clear about the fact that we are still missing some of the data that we need. We are now close to 2 weeks since the big kind of coming out party of Omicron, which took control of the corporate news cycle starting on and right after Thanksgiving, lasted several days, and now sort of in subsequent forms has lasted nearly 2 weeks. Dr. Anthony Fauci, who heads up the NIH, lead infectious disease doctor in the United States, is now calling the early signs encouraging about Omicron. Without question, this variant appears to be as or up to significantly more contagious than Delta. That's sort of like one side of the equation. It's spreading rapidly, it's spreading very rapidly, and hospitalizations are going up. But the data we have so far is that the hospitalizations are going up because of Delta driving hospitalizations. It does not appear at this time that Omicron is actually leading to significant hospitalization at all. It is spreading quickly. It may ultimately outcompete Delta in terms of infections, but for right now, and Dr. Fauci concurs, it is encouraging that while it appears to be more contagious, it seems to be less severe. Now, the dream scenario would be that Omicron, in exchange for being wildly contagious, is more of a cold than a serious virus with a death rate close to 1%, as COVID has been throughout this pandemic. That means it will spread, but fewer people comparatively will end up in the hospital and die. That's the hope, and we don't yet know. Dr. Fauci was on CNN this weekend where he said, quote, "Thus far, it does not look like there's a great degree of severity to it, but we have really got to be careful before we make any determinations that it is less severe or it really doesn't cause any severe illness." So this is really the key thing to understand. If you look at something for 15 seconds and then make a conclusion, you are almost certainly not operating even with the full data that we have. And the full data that we have is still not as full as it ultimately needs to be. If you just look and you see, wow, cases are spiking, hospitalizations are up, Omicron must be a disaster. But remember, we expected to some degree that cases and hospitalizations were going to spike during the winter. The question is the news about Omicron from nearly 2 weeks ago the reason for the spiking hospitalizations? And it appears for now that the answer is no. It is Delta driving hospitalizations in the north of the US, not Omicron. So still understand that if Omicron is as contagious as it might be, it will infect a lot more people. So even if the hospitalization rate is lower, you might still end up with more people hospitalized in terms of raw numbers. Some of them will end up in the ICU. Some of them will die. Just imagine, this is made up, but imagine that we determined Omicron is 3 times as contagious, but half as deadly. That still means more people are going to end up in the hospital, a lower percentage of those that get the virus, but more people will end up in the hospital. Lastly, we also have to remember that the prevailing narratives about these variants at the start are often untrue. And that's why I've been going out of my way. I mean, nearly 2 weeks now that I've been saying, right now, all we have is anecdotes. Now, all we have is preliminary data. That's where we are right now. With Delta, initially, it was all sort of muted. It was more neutral. It was starting to spread in other countries and hospitalizing a lot of people, but there was not really the panicked media coverage. And then a huge spike with tons of deaths hit the United States and basically everywhere. And then the media coverage changed. With Omicron, the coverage started with complete and total panic. Now it seems it may be more mild, still could end up going some other way. The point is, 2 weeks in, we don't know. And for now, I wouldn't be taking any chances on the assumption that it's more mild. In a few weeks, we will know for sure. Now, over time, this is how viruses stop being a pandemic. We learned this in our interview with Columbia University's virologist, Vincent Racaniello. In general, viral evolution tends to be more contagious and less severe, but it can still be deadly for years and years and years. Now, from a kind of sociological standpoint, the level of fatigue with this is obviously very, very high. A lot of people just feeling, I'm throwing in the towel. It's time to move on. I'm not going to pay attention anymore. I'm going to do whatever. That's not where I am right now. As I've said in bits and pieces, I got my 3rd shot. Early data is that 3rd shot is very effective at preventing you from getting sick at all. Much more than just the 2 doses. We're still waiting on more data there, but that's hopeful. Any place that says masks recommended, I'm wearing a mask. I'm not going to movie theaters. I'm not going to concerts. I'm not going to sporting events and these types of large events. I am going to restaurants indoors if the tables aren't very close together. I care less about, do I have to wear a mask up to the counter to order? I care more about, am I going to sit for an hour really, really close to another table? I'm not going to those. I'm not going to bars where people are hanging out for hours. I am, of course, flying, but with a mask that's legally required. And I'm seeing friends who I know are vaccinated and whose daily risk level is acceptable to me. They either work from home or, have a low level of risk indoors. I am doing that. It is true. The right's talking points are always, they grapple with a kernel of truth and go too far. Isolation has consequences, but for a long time, for me, the risk balance told me, I'm going to stick with the isolation. With what we now know and having 3 doses, I'm more comfortable trading some risk for decreased isolation and more socialization. Everybody has to run this calculation for themselves, but the key is run it with actual accurate information, which we are still gathering when it comes to the Omicron variant. New York City is now putting in place the strictest vaccine mandate in the country. This is Bill de Blasio, New York City mayor, on his way out, remember, with incoming mayor Eric Adams replacing him soon. Here's what's going on in New York City. Starting on December 27th, and maybe specifically timed in advance of New Year's Eve, New York City's vaccine mandate will expand to all private sector workers. What counts as vaccination will change to 2 doses rather than 1. Kids aged 5 to 11 will be subject to the vaccination mandate, and all will have to show proof of full vaccination, meaning 2 doses, to do indoor dining and to go to other activities starting December 14th, which is a week from today. This is all sort of happening in the context of Omicron, even as we don't know exactly what the outlook is. As I just told you, it appears to be more contagious, and early data suggests it is less severe. Now, there's a couple of questions here. One of the big questions is, okay, great, it's a vaccine mandate. Vaccinate or else. Or else what? And it's not totally clear yet. And the or else what, some legal experts are saying, is what could determine whether this stands up to a court challenge. Now, I'm just being upfront. On the one hand, for these types of mandates, just actual straight up mandates being legal, is this, I believe it's a Jacobson v. Massachusetts case from 1903 and the smallpox vaccine. That continues to be what we point to and say these mandates are legal. When the idea of a federal mandate was brought up, there were questions about, well, would Jacobson v. Massachusetts, which was a local mandate in the city of Cambridge, I believe it was Cambridge, would that apply to a federal vaccine mandate? Well, it's not really clear. Well, it seems that state and local vaccine mandates are more likely to pass muster. But then another wrinkle to this, one lawyer I spoke to this morning mentioned, is what is the or else? If it's just a fine if you don't get vaccinated, that's more likely to stand up to a court challenge. If it's something else that we don't yet know, maybe it won't. I think almost certainly there is going to be a legal challenge to this. I have no idea what the outcome of that would be. One thing we know is that vaccine mandates work. Now, that doesn't tell us whether they're legally okay, and that doesn't tell us whether they are morally okay. Those are different issues, which each of us can grapple with, and I tend to think that they are okay. But vaccine mandates work. And despite all of the hyperbolic and histrionic claims, every time such a mandate is put in place that everybody's going to quit, 20% of the NYPD is going to quit, we end up with between 0.5% and 1% of any particular workforce saying that's too much and I'm going to bail. So they do work. The reality is that at some point, we don't know when. My hope is that it's sooner, but it may be years. At some point, COVID becomes less severe. That's generally the evolution of these viruses. Check out my interview, again, with Vincent Racaniello from a few weeks ago. Once that happens, it would seem logical that the COVID vaccine would go back to being the same sort of status as the flu vaccine, which is some people get it and some people don't. And it's not a big controversy in this way. Let me know your thoughts about what New York City is doing. I'm less curious legally. Courts will sort that out. I'm less curious in terms of efficacy. We know that they work. Morally speaking, where are you on vaccine mandates like this? You can find me on Twitter at @dpacman. And remember that tomorrow, a 1 week from today, not tomorrow, 1 week from today is the next David Pakman Show viewer town hall. It'll be December 14th, 6 p.m. Eastern time. We'll take a quick break and be right back.
One of our sponsors is Disco. There are so many different types of bogus skincare products for men out there. What you really want to go with is just something affordable, effective, and created by dermatologists. That's why we have Disco, which delivers the science-backed, over-the-counter skin treatments that dermatologists recommend to their patients every day. The Disco Starter Set is a simple way to take care of your skin in 3 quick steps. The Face Cleanser Stick fights oily skin. The Exfoliating Face Scrub prevents razor burn. And the Face Moisturizer keeps your skin hydrated. Disco can also help with ingrown hairs, dry skin, acne, and other things. You just need 60 seconds a day. I've been using it for a while now. I'm seeing a noticeable difference. Maybe you can even tell. Check out Disco. Try out the products for yourself. You will like the results and you'll get 30% off when you go to letsdisco.com/Pacman or just enter the code Pacman. The link is down below.
The David Pakman Show does truly depend on your support to fund the daily production of this program. We have employees. I try to be a good boss. We offer benefits and health insurance contribution, retirement account, etc. I try to be a good boss, and we try to put out a quality product every day. And the last half of 2021 has been really tough in terms of memberships. I don't often speak in terms these frank. You always have to pretend everything's always going as well as ever, but the last 6 months have really been tough, and it makes sense because a lot of elements of the economy have been very tough. But if you're someone who can put a few bucks a month towards a program that you presumably value, if you're in our audience, I would love for you to sign up at joinpacman.com, and you can use the coupon code BETTER21. And I will make one other offer to you, which is if you pay full price for a year membership, meaning $60, I'm glad to send you a free David Pakman Show t-shirt of your choice. Just email info@davidpakman.com and let us know once you've signed up. Remember, it's got to be a full price yearly membership. I mean, we can't lose money, right? Otherwise it's counterproductive. But if you buy a full price yearly membership, I will gladly send you a free t-shirt. Just reach out when you sign up. Joinpakman.com is the place to do it. I want to say something to both the left and right here, or at least I want to address the left and right about something that I think both sides need to hear, but for different reasons. If you've been watching Joe Biden for the last couple of months, and I've covered a ton of the events that Joe Biden has done, you might have noticed something is up with Joe Biden's voice, and he's had a cough, quite frankly, for months. Now, there may have been some breaks there where it was not a consecutive cough for the full period of months, but it's been going on for months at this point in time. Joe Biden is the president of the United States. The president of the United States' health is a matter of national security and of global importance. There's no reason to downplay that. So it's okay to be wondering, what's up with that cough? What's up with the strained voice? What is going on? Biden had a cough months ago and his voice sounded strained, and there were questions then. It may have gone away for a little bit, maybe not. It's now back. Now the White House says it's a cold that he got from his grandson. Okay, that may well be true, and it is fine to ask in good faith what is going on, and to the extent that we believe the White House is being upfront, that's what it is, and the left shouldn't attack people asking what is going on with Joe Biden's cough and voice. I've wondered what's going on. I know many of you have, who comment on it during my streams. With folks who are Joe Biden's age, sometimes colds and coughs just can linger for months. It's completely plausible that that's the explanation. There's no issue with asking about this or being worried about it or saying the White House should be transparent about it. Now, that's for those on the left. On the other hand, there are bad faith actors on the right who are, number one, weaponizing Joe Biden's cough to make points about COVID policy and other things. And number two, a lot of those very same people had no concern at all about Donald Trump's health, his cognitive health and his physical health throughout all of Donald Trump's administration. So let's take it step by step. Biden's cough is being used to ask questions like the one I'm going to play for you now, where Fox News reporter Peter Doocy says to Jen Psaki, isn't Biden bad for exposing people by breaking COVID protocol, by being at work when he still has the cough?
One more topic to follow up on some of the questions from earlier. The president was hoarse and coughing today. A lot of people in the workforce are encouraged not to go to work if they are exhibiting those symptoms, even if they are fully vaccinated. So are the rules different for the president?
The president, again, was tested, as we put out in a transparent piece of information from his doctor, where he received a response quickly from that test, enabling him to proceed. People also he had a cold, which is what you know from the information put out by the doctor.
But as you know from your own experience, it is possible to test negative several times before there's a positive test. So is there any concern about having him at work while he's got these symptoms, even if he is showing negative
I can assure you that the president follows every protocol. He wants to keep everyone safe in the White House, and that's why, obviously, we consult with the doctor, and we put out that information to make it available to all of you. Go ahead.
Okay, so while it is true that sometimes people test negative for a while and then they test positive, Joe Biden has no other symptoms that we know of. He's had this cough for, if I'm honest, he's had it for months. Weaponizing it in this way to make it about COVID protocol is absolute and total BS. But more importantly, when Trump seemed to be having cognitive issues, these very same people said nothing. They were silent about it. Trump asked, where is Rudy Giuliani, when Rudy was sitting right across the table from Trump? Trump got off Air Force One, wandered off looking for his limo, had to be brought back by a Secret Service agent. Trump helped down the ramp at West Point. Trump glitching when trying to speak. Trump asking about the oranges of an investigation. And these people said nothing until he took a dementia test, which they say, wow, he aced a really difficult test, which actually isn't difficult. When Trump then had COVID, we knew they were lying. We knew they were lying about when did Trump first get it. We knew they were lying about how sick was Trump. Asked, did Trump need oxygen? Dr. Sean Conley saying he's not on oxygen. No, but did he need it? Well, I don't want to go backwards. When did he last test negative? Let's not go to the past. Let's go to the future. I cared about that, and I also care about Joe Biden's cough. Biden having a cough and a strained voice for months is not great, and I want to know everything there is to know about it. Leftists should understand that it's okay to ask about that. But the right-wingers who said nothing about Trump's physical health during his hospital stay and said nothing about his cognitive health throughout the presidency are just bad faith actors. And we know exactly what they're doing. We know exactly why they're doing it. And it is another example of they claim that these are their principles, but as soon as the principles are inconvenient, they abandon them. And we're going to talk about that sort of underlying topic next as well. Today, I bring you the next installment, the latest episode in These Are My Principles Until They Conflict with the Facts. And this is a really common theme on the right. When there is a shooting involving a Black or Muslim perpetrator, or a violent protest with property damage, or some horrible murder, the right is very quick to say it's about the parents. Blame the parents. Single parent households are to blame. Liberal households are bad for not instilling the right values in these perpetrators. Parents. And then we have a situation where the parents are really to blame and have been criminally charged. And now the problem is the school where the shooter went. What? This is beyond parody, but it's what they're doing. When this horrible school shooting took place in Oxford, Michigan, the parents of the teenager who committed the shooting have actually been charged for involuntary manslaughter, and then they went on the run. Police eventually found them. They've now been arraigned, formally charged. They are being charged because of the allegedly unrestricted access that their son, the shooter, had to the gun that he's accused of using in the shooting. Finally, we're holding the parents accountable, right? Fox News and right-wing media should be cheering and saying, we are so glad that finally the focus is on the family. And oh, they're not? No. Here is Fox News host Judge Jeanine Pirro saying, we've got to blame, I hope you're sitting, we have to blame the liberal school personnel at the school for this shooting. You really can't write this stuff.
And then there's Oxford, Michigan, with Ethan Crumbley, who shot and killed 4 students and injured 7 others, including a teacher. For no reason, because liberal school personnel should have known Crumbley had a gun, or at least had access to one, but never bothered to ask. The very reason they told his parents to come to class instead of suspending him immediately, and then they let him go right back into class.
So this time it was the fault of the school workers who didn't act to take away the gun from their kid. This time it's the school workers' fault. So fundamentally, what is this really about? It's about the parents being Trump-supporting right-wing nuts. There's no reason to mince words. There's no reason to pretend it's anything else. The Michigan school massacre suspect's mother wrote a letter to Trump, praising Trump for his support of gun rights, gushing about her ability to be a realtor and have her guns with her. She praised Trump for the border wall. She complained about parents at other schools where the kids come from illegal immigrant parents and don't care about learning, as she said. That's what this is about. The principle of look to the family, look to the parents, that they so dearly cling to when it's convenient, flies away like dandelion spores once the principle is no longer convenient, the way it is here, because the parents are Trump supporters. That's all it is. And this is another reason why I encourage you not to get sucked into the principles black hole with these right-wingers. Something I've experienced so often when I take calls from the audience and in other situations is, David, please tell me where you are on the principles of this or that. I'm for freedom, family, and non-aggression. Those are my principles. Great. How do we solve climate change on the basis of your principles? And it goes nowhere. Principles are valuable in creating a baseline for solving real world problems and figuring out specific situations. But the principles alone don't solve the problems for you unless you know how to apply them. And maybe most importantly, it's a waste of time to argue principles with these people because they don't even really stand by the principles when the principles start to contradict their preconceived notions of how the world should be organized. Now, should we give Judge Jeanine credit for blaming school personnel instead of critical race theory? Maybe, right? I mean, given the environment, I sort of expected that's the direction she would go. She didn't, but the parents are no longer a source of concern for pro-family advocate Judge Jeanine Pirro. Let me know your thoughts. We're going to have more on this on the David Pakman Show Instagram. Find it at David Pakman Show. And make sure you're following me on Instagram at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be right back.
Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It's great to welcome to the program today Stanley McChrystal, retired United States Army general and also author of the very interesting book, Risk: A User's Guide. I really appreciate your time today. It's great to have you on.
Well, it's my pleasure, David. Thank you.
So you talk in the book about how we all have a sort of immune system to deal with risk that evaluates risk and is sort of in an iterative way analyzing what are acceptable and unacceptable levels of risk in life. Can you talk a little bit about how the system operates, how it's developed, where it comes from?
Absolutely. As we started studying for the book, we first came to the conclusion that the greatest risk to us is in fact us. And we came upon the analogy to the human immune system. And the human immune system is a miracle. It basically detects threats that are ingested by our bodies, analyzes each one for their threat to us, responds, normally destroys them if necessary, and then learns from that process. And that's the principle behind vaccination. And it does that about 10,000 times a day, they estimate, on things that could make us sick or kill us. And yet we don't have to spend much time thinking about it unless the immune system doesn't work. Well, organizations and actually individuals have what we call a risk immune system. And that's a series of 10 risk control factors like communication, narrative, action, timing, leadership, things that form a holistic ability to respond. And what this really says is we can't predict every risk or threat that's going to approach us. We're just not that good, and in a complex world, it's a fool's errand to try. But what we can do is make ourselves more resilient, make our organizations better able to respond to those things that come at us from every direction and of unexpected form.
I want to kind of build up to big organizations like the military and large corporations, but maybe we could start just with an example at the individual level. I remember when I was 18, I got a motorcycle. And my parents didn't like it, but I think they thought if they tell me get rid of it, it'll make me want the motorcycle more. So I think it was sort of like a let him get it out of his system thing. And I had an experience where I hit a little bump, the front wheel came down, and the handlebars started getting a little squirrely. And at that point, it was a fraction of a second where I said, this is beyond my risk tolerance. I realized it's too dangerous, and I got rid of it. Now, that one instant decision, I'm guessing, is coming cumulatively at the end of a whole bunch of different inputs over the course of my life up to that point that allows me to intuitively assess that the risk here now exceeds the reward. How does that system get built up over time?
Well, over time, you first learn the ability to know what's important to you. Typically, when you're about 18, when I had a motorcycle as well, I was interested in being cool and going places, not spending a lot of money to do that. And so that became a very high priority for me. And I was able to sort of compartment away the idea that I would set the bike down and get scraped up, which I did, and other things like that. And so you start with prioritizing what's important. And then as experience comes, you also learn that things can happen. In the military, people talk about new soldiers being scared in combat. Well, the reality is every brand new soldier thinks they're bulletproof until they realize they are not. So it is older, more experienced soldiers, in fact, that have a better appreciation for what the dangers of combat can bring, and they tend to be more cautious. They tend to do more things to prepare effectively, to wear body armor, to do all those things. So we will learn through a lifetime what's important to us, what we've got to protect, and then we also learn what are the things we have to do to put in place protections. In some cases, it's modify our behavior. In other cases, it's use different equipment, have a car, not a motorcycle, things like that.
When it comes to the military, it seems that there's this additional component that has to fit into the risk calculation, which is that elected officials who are outside of the military make decisions about what they want the military to be doing. So, I mean, thinking about Iraq as an example, we could do an assessment of the kind of risks of that mission from a strategic and tactical standpoint. That doesn't really seem to account for the political motivations that exist in even thinking of doing that in the first place. So how does an organization like the military, where risk assessment is so important, deal with the fact that much of what is being done is politically oriented?
Well, you hit a good one here, David, because these things are often at tension. You may have policymakers who want to accomplish something, and they're prepared to accept great risk to the force so they can do that because they think that the overarching objective is important. And as long as everybody is informed and aligned on that, then you can operate pretty well. The problem is when you have them in tensions, like in Mogadishu in 1993, there was this mission creep. And the force on the ground thought that their mission was to get Farah Hadid. They did a number of operations. The risks grew higher. And then when it ended up on the night of 3-4 October 1993 with the big firefight in which 18 Americans were killed, policymakers recoiled because suddenly that level of loss was a domestic political risk that they weren't prepared to accept. And so what had happened is you can find people can wander away from being focused and aligned on the real risks to something, and then unexpected outcomes produce really difficult circumstances.
Did you have situations where you were analyzing a situation or a mission from a risk standpoint in the way that the military does it, and then when you present it to an elected official, you realize that you guys just are not on the same page, that the risk assessment, the way you're doing it, is disconnected from their political priorities?
Well, in fact, and often their political priorities aren't perfectly aligned in their own minds because they just haven't thought through it enough. So, for example, during the war in Afghanistan, there was a great concern over American casualties. And I absolutely get that. The people that you're serving with, you don't want them injured or killed. At the same time, a policymaker may be saying the important thing is to prevent any American casualties. Well, you can't accomplish the mission if you don't accept some level of risk. I go to the loss of Ambassador Chris Stevens in North Africa a few years ago, and there was this call that Chris Stevens should not have been in Benghazi, should not have been at a location where he could be at risk. Well, I would argue, if you don't want him at risk, put him in Ohio. The problem is there's a different risk. He won't accomplish any diplomatic objectives. So you've got to understand what the overall requirement is and then temper your risks according to that. And too often we have policymakers, people on the ground, and different players not aligned with a common understanding of what the actual mission is and what the risks involved are.
How could those things be better aligned? Because it seems fundamental to the way that a military operates, which is the military operates in one way, whereas their missions are often guided by different considerations, and it creates this conflict that you're talking about, or this incongruency maybe. Is there some way that it could be organized differently so that those are better aligned?
Well, first is communication, and of course, a clear narrative provided by leadership. You know, and the military's not clean on this. It's not like the military's got it right and other people don't.
Sure.
If you give military people a requirement, often they will say, well, the thing that is least risky to us is to use massive fire support, you know, pummel the area, go in and occupy, and that reduces the risk to our soldiers, and we will accomplish the overall mission. But if in doing so, you alienate the population, or you create popular resentment around the world to what you do, then what you've done is you've actually lost the big objective by trying to reduce risks at the local level. In Afghanistan, we had a period going into an area in Helmand where the local commander used a term called courageous restraint. We are going to have our soldiers operate in a way that's actually riskier for them, their personal safety, but it's more aligned with what we have to do to win the support of the Afghan people. And that's where this communication has to occur, because policymakers can see soldiers out accepting risk and they go, no, I don't want them to accept risk. When in reality, you got to be focused on what's going to produce the most important outcome, the overall mission that you're there for.
In the midst of these missions, you know, sometimes we hear that, not that it's easy, but that it's typical that individual service members will say, you know, I'm not here because I decided that this is the mission we should be doing. I'm here, I'm a cog in the wheel, or I'm doing my part, and there's, you know, a chain of command, et cetera, and the political considerations are not important. But then in the later years of the Iraq War in particular, as I remember it vividly, we started to hear more stories from people coming back and saying, when we were there, we were talking about, if this was their opinion, why are we even here? Iraq didn't do 9/11. I don't understand what we're doing. And that started to become a factor for some, not for all. Obviously, many believe that we should have been there. Can you talk a little bit about how common that is and how it impacts service members to be on a mission that they may think is not one that should be even on the table?
I think it's very common in almost every war. And it comes partly from a misalignment on what the actual mission is. And there's also comes when the frustration if you don't think you're accomplishing it. Many people don't understand that in 1864, President Abraham Lincoln thought that he was going to lose re-election. And he thought he was going to lose re-election because people in the North had soured on the war, and particularly in the Eastern theater, they had not seen a tremendous amount of success. And so frustration, soldiers were saying, I am fighting in a war that we are not winning, and therefore I'm not accomplishing anything. And so that happened in Afghanistan, that happened in Iraq. You also see things that, you know, with your Iraqi partners or Afghans, you see corruption or a lack of effectiveness, and you become cynical. You go, why am I here doing my best and risking my life when in fact the people who we are theoretically helping aren't doing an equal amount? That's age old. You'll never do away with that. You do try to address it so that soldiers understand, but then you also try to make sure soldiers understand the overall purpose of their mission. It's really important for commanders and political leaders to constantly explain to soldiers, why are they doing this? If I think of soldiers in the Philippines in early 1942, as the Japanese were moving to conquer it, which resulted in the Bataan Death March, many of them felt that they'd been abandoned and there was no point in trying to defend something that was indefensible. And it gets down to communication and leadership.
When it came to Afghanistan, because this is an area that you know well, and the recent withdrawal that President Joe Biden carried out, my perspective was when Donald Trump proposed it, I liked the idea. And when Joe Biden did it, I liked the idea. And my belief is that the problems that took place would have taken place no matter when it was done. And that fundamentally, as you talk about the big picture versus the nitty gritty, it was the right thing to do. Do you have thoughts about how it went, given that you spent so much time there?
Yeah, I'm probably more forgiving on the actual problems at the end than some people might be. And the first reason is when President Trump did the Doha Accords and agreed that Americans would leave by 1 May 2021. He was ending the forever war, and that was what the consensus of the American people really wanted to have happen.
Yes.
And so the next 18 months, the Taliban didn't attack Americans because it wasn't in their interest. They just wanted us to leave. The danger was from Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who had a reason to want to attack us on the way out. So as this small American force, it was down to about 2,500 people, when it came time to reduce that force and begin the actual withdrawal, you're going to have increasing risk as it gets smaller because less ability to defend yourself. Now, of course, the question is, why couldn't the government of Afghanistan maintain legitimacy and its military maintain coherence during that process? Well, what I would say is the Afghan government struggled with legitimacy from the beginning, partly by their own fault and partly for factors, but also the Taliban did a really good information warfare campaign, so that right after the Doha Accords were signed, for 18 months, they went around the country and they said, as soon as the Americans leave, we're going to flip power here. And so no rational Afghan official or military wants to be the last person killed in a losing cause. So the Taliban didn't conquer Afghanistan, they occupied it, when the air went out of the balloon. I know that we say it's an intelligence failure by American intelligence community or military not to know that was going to happen. And I would say this is more art than science. It was hard. So I don't think it went like we wanted it to. I don't think the overall outcome certainly doesn't make anybody happy. But I don't think it was the fiasco that is sometimes described. There were risks involved and people knew that.
Do you think it would have been just as chaotic had Donald Trump stuck to his original timeline?
Yeah, I think the risk of it would have been there. I don't think that would have changed the risk of that. You can't guarantee it would have happened, but I don't see any reason to believe it would have been different.
Fair. I guess we should talk a little bit about organizations and corporations when we talk about risk, just to go back to the start of our conversation. We've talked about individuals in the military. It seems one of the unique things about the idea of a corporation is that the corporation is a legal entity, it's an idea, but it's made up of individuals. And because of the size of some very large corporations, as well as a kind of imbalanced risk reward for the individuals, where they could make a decision that has the potential to make them a lot of money, but has relatively little downside, because at the end of the day, there is this apparatus called an S corporation or a C corporation that exists there. Does that skew risk calculation for large corporations? And could it be a factor in these situations where you hear about big corporations doing bad things, whether they are environmentally or legally or whatever the case may be?
I think it can. I don't think it always does that, but if we forget that corporations have a responsibility as an entity, think of them as a huge person, they still have a responsibility for their conduct and for things that they do. But there is this idea that if you're in the herd and you're doing something you know is wrong, it's like being at a big social event and everybody starts acting stupid. They're drinking too much or they're rushing the stage or whatever they're doing. There's this ability to think you are anonymous in the crowd. And sometimes you are incentivized to make a lot of money. I think during the roll up to the real estate crisis, 2008, there were a lot of people who knew things were not good, but yet they are making a lot of money at the moment, and they go, well, I'm just a small entity in a big thing, and what's the chance that the big thing is going to collapse? And of course, the reality is the big thing is made up of a lot of small things, so it can collapse. So there's a moral licensing there. There's a moral hazard that you can think you don't have the same level of responsibility because of that, since you're just a cog in the large wheel.
The book is fascinating. It's called Risk, a User's Guide. We've been speaking with the author, Stanley McChrystal, retired United States Army general. I so appreciate your time today. I really do.
David, thanks very much for the conversation.
If you value what we do at The David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind-the-scenes videos, the Daily Bonus Show, the commercial-free Daily Show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
Well, it's happening again as we continue to wait and see whether there will even be an attempt made to hold Donald Trump accountable for his various actions while president related to the January 6th Trump riots. Donald Trump appeared Sunday night on Mark Levin's Fox News show, and he admitted to the crime of obstruction, and it is not the first time that he has done it. Trump straight up told Mark Levin, "I fired James Comey. If I didn't, he would have taken down the president. He would have taken down me." This is an admission that Trump's firing of Comey was deliberately calculated to stop the progress of an investigation of which Trump was a subject and which Trump calculated would ultimately come back to hurt him. This is obstruction of justice. Let's take a look at this first clip. The content is also part of a broader situation of hilarity and horror, which is that Donald Trump was on Mark Levin's show to promote his picture book. And you might be saying, what do you mean a picture book? Yeah, we covered a week or two ago, like many past presidents, Donald Trump has put out a book. Unlike past presidents, Donald Trump's book is a picture book with captions that read like tweets. Many of them are insults about people like Nancy Pelosi and others. I mean, at every layer, at every level, it's completely pathetic and humiliating. But Donald Trump is promoting it anyway. So let's get right into the moment in question here. I would say listen carefully, but you barely need to listen carefully to understand what it is Donald Trump is saying here.
The most incredible things. Don't forget, I fired Comey. Had I not fired Comey, you might not be talking to me right now about a beautiful book of 4 years at the White House. And we'll see about the future. The future is going to be very interesting. But I fired Comey, that whole group, and now that group is coming back again? I mean, it's not believable. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. Shouldn't be allowed to happen.
I fired Comey, and if I hadn't, you might not be talking to me right now. So you knew that Comey continuing to investigate might be bad for you, and you fired him to interfere and obstruct with the interfere with and obstruct the investigation. That's obstruction of justice. Trump says, I couldn't have survived if I did not fire James Comey. And in this next clip, and now this is a former president, guys. Trump even raises the term deep state, that it was deep state actors. Off the wall bonkers stuff from anyone. Never mind a former president of the United States.
The words deep state, but they've been there for a long time. They've been in the Justice Department, they've been in the FBI, they've been in CIA. So you're coming into a hornet's nest. I was going to say before, if I didn't fire Comey, they were looking to take down the president of the United States. If I didn't fire him, and some people said he made a mistake when he fired Comey. And now those same people said it was the most incredible instinctual moves that they've ever seen. Because I might be here with you, perhaps we'll be talking about something else. But I don't think I could have survived if I didn't fire him, because it was like a hornet's nest. When I fired him, they all went crazy against each other.
So multiple admissions to obstruction. We could focus in on the deep state stuff. The deep state stuff is not dissimilar from the sort of shadow government conspiracies we've talked about before. These take many different forms. Sometimes the gist of shadow government conspiracy theories is that the real elected officials are merely a facade. There's an underbelly of those who really control what's going on. And it's sort of a fill in the blank, choose your own adventure of who that is. Sometimes it's the Illuminati. Sometimes it's Democrats. Sometimes it's a pedophile ring. The Jews is a classic. It could be, the Saudis. I mean, every version of shadow government exists. Deep state is just a version of that. That's all it is, and Trump's promoting it. So we're not even going to get into that. Obstruction of justice. Donald Trump says in no uncertain terms here, I fired James Comey because the FBI was looking into my actions, and it might have been really bad if he were able to complete that investigation unfettered, so I stopped it. Think about any other scenario in which an individual takes actions to prevent law enforcement from investigating them. It's obstruction. It's obstruction. And you all know that I've said, some of you yell at me when I say it, I don't think Trump will ever do a day in prison. I just don't see it. And I still think that that's the case. I don't think Trump's going to do a day in prison. But without a doubt, the admissions that he has now made multiple times, the facts, it points to Attorney General Merrick Garland should be pushing forward on a Trump probe here. We don't know exactly what Garland's up to. It doesn't really seem like he's doing it. How many times does Donald Trump have to implicate himself before someone will say, okay, you know what, let's do it. Let's look into it. Statute of limitations, not the reason. 5 years on obstruction. We are at 4.5. We are starting to get tight on time when it comes to the statute of limitations on obstruction, as far as I understand, but it is not yet up. Is it as simple as there's one set of rules for people like Trump and a different set of rules for normal people? Maybe now we're getting warmer. Is there something here about putting partisanship aside? Even a Democratic attorney general understands that opening up the door to the prosecution of a former president is a door that he doesn't want to open and maybe has been encouraged not to open. Maybe. I don't know. But at this point, how many times is Trump going to admit what he did before it's taken seriously and actually investigated? I mentioned yesterday that we'd be talking about this briefly today. Donald Trump has been reduced to ranting about the 2020 election in what is now almost the year 2022 to dinner guests who are seemingly just trying to have a nice dinner. And when we ask the question, does Trump really believe this stuff when he says it? Does Trump really believe that he won the 2020 election? Does Trump really believe that there were massive dumps of fake ballots or whatever the case? This video that I'm going to play for you is in the he does believe it sort of category, because I think that if he's ranting at people at a random dinner, it suggests to me that he thinks it's real. But he might just be that much of a narcissist that he feels like he has to keep the lie going at all times. I don't know. Let's take a look at the video and tell me what you think. And also consider just how humiliating it is that 13 months after losing an election pretty badly, this is what a former president is up to. 11 months after leaving office, ranting at a dinner to guests that he actually won. And as a little bonus, at about the 75-second mark, you're going to see one of the guys in the background look at his watch, which is just, I mean, it's bonus points at this point. Take a look.
If you get the same number, which was 63 million as you got last time, you can't lose. If you got 1 million more, it's guaranteed. I got 12 million more. No president has ever gotten anything like it. There's never been anybody that got 12 million more. We got, and it's not me, we got, because it's us, it's not me, it's we. It really is we. And we did so well, and then the thing was all rigged and a disgraceful thing, the mail-in ballots, it was just horrible. They mailed hundreds of millions of ballots. People are getting 7 ballots, they're getting 6. There was somebody I just met upstairs, so I got 5 ballots sent to me. I just happens to be a Democrat too. I said, what do you do with them? But just to give you something positive, we will bring back this country. We're going to have a great 22. We're never going to forget 2020. We're never, you know the expression, never again. We're never going to let it happen. We're never forgetting it. We're going to watch it because we can't let it ever happen again. And we continue to pursue it, and we will, because so many things, like as an example, Arizona, as an example, Wisconsin, as an example now, Pennsylvania, with subpoenas all over the place, which is positive. In other words, real subpoenas. And these people, you know, these people doing the, whatever you call it, because it was really a protest. The insurrection took place on Election Day, and the rest was a protest. And what they should be investigating is the election, not what took place that day. They should be, because the reason they had the protest is because of the election. It's very simple.
Isn't that truly something? I mean, it's like a broken record, but an embarrassing and pathetic broken record. And I have to tell you, watching that, I realized how much I don't miss having those rants every single day in the corporate media narrative. And thanks to Trump being banned from Twitter, they also aren't on Twitter. But what is the future for this guy? He seems to have completely lost it, humiliated globally, the laughingstock of the world, most of the world glad he's gone, with very few exceptions. Russia's an exception. Russians liked Trump. There were one or two, I think it was it Turkey and Nigeria? I don't remember now. With very few exceptions, the world's citizens are glad that Trump is gone. He's a legend in his own mind, but his devoted followers want him back. We know that. Every poll of Republicans tells us that. And if we're not careful, he could well end up back in office. One last thing that's just kind of funny. I've talked before about these linguistic tells that Trump is lying. One of them is, the most famous one is when Trump recounts a story and says, they came to me, they said, sir. Whatever he says after that, it's a lie. The sir routine, as it's been called, is a signal that Trump is lying. Another signal Trump is lying is when he says something crazy and then says, and it's a shame, and it's a shame. So for example, he'll say, they did these massive dumps of ballots and stole the whole thing, and I really won, and it's a shame that it happened. That's a signal that Trump is lying. A third one is, and we can never let it happen again. And we can never let it happen again. That's another one of these linguistic tells that Trump is not telling the truth. And the fourth one would be Trump is speaking, right? That's like a more catch-all signal that Trump is not telling the truth. We have a voicemail number, and that number is 219-2DAVID-P. Let me play the voicemail first. It's about my conversations with Dave Rubin. Let's play it first, and then I'll address it.
Hey, David. I was just wondering if you had an update or if you had ever recently talked to Dave Rubin.
Right.
He's somebody who I think we all know what's happened with him, but he's someone who initially I didn't really pay much attention to. And then, in 2016, 17, 18, when he was doing the whole reform the left, anti-regressive left kind of thing, I was like, okay, it's cool. Like, I don't agree with everything he says, but it's cool. And I think you interviewed him around that time.
Sure.
When he was saying he's a classic liberal and all this. But I think we've just kind of seen his evolution into something that is just completely, basically just Candace Owens. Like, that's who he is at this point. He's like, they're indistinguishable from each other. Or like, Charlie Kirk. Like, they're pretty much the same in terms of what they say and what they believe. Do you think there's anything genuine to Dave Rubin's political awakening, if you want to call it? And have you maintained any kind of contact with him? I'm just flabbergasted by him and what's happened to him over the years.
Yeah. So as many of you know, I used to be in touch with Dave Rubin sort of regularly, between like exchanging emails and texts and sometimes speaking on the phone. This is a long, long, long time ago, before his political awakening. I believe that Dave Rubin's political awakening is completely sincere as far as he is aware. Now, I'm going to explain what I mean by that. Most of the time, when people are, I don't know how old he was when maybe he was 40-ish, when he had this complete political realignment or awakening, as he calls it, and left the left and is a Trump supporter now. Most people at that age don't have that unless one of two things has happened. One, they never followed politics. Like they were only so loosely following politics that they kind of fell into whatever their parents supported or friends or whatever, never really thought about it. For the first time, they learn about politics at age 40 and they go, oh, my politics are actually this. And so there you might see a shift. That's not Dave Rubin's situation. He was in political media for years. He was on TYT and all this other stuff. The second one is that you are bamboozled by your own audience and financial opportunities into believing that you actually believe this stuff. So do I think Dave Rubin in his mind goes, I don't believe any of this crap, but I'm making money from it? No. I think Rubin has actually fallen for it. I think he now is, as far as he knows, a true believer. But it's, of course, been influenced by the friends he made in so doing and the money he made in so doing. Now, I did recently exchange some texts with Dave Rubin. I don't know if you guys remember, but not long ago, I told the story of when I was leaving a restaurant and someone yelled to me, it was, "You Jew Zionist pig." And I told the story. And like one or two little articles were written about it. And somehow Rubin heard about it. And he texted me saying, "You are now the victim of the monster you helped create. And just wait what happens when people on the right come out and start supporting you for what happened to you." That never happened. Never happened. And he was, at least, again, as far as he was concerned, he was completely genuine in what he was saying. And so I do think that he is a true believer. I do believe that he has fallen for it in sum total. And it's very strange. And other than that, I've not had any contact with Dave Rubin in a really long time. That was probably, let me think, it was kind of cold out. It must have been early spring. It must have been like when it was starting to get warm-ish, like maybe April of this year, something around that. Very, very strange stuff. We have a fantastic bonus show for you today. As I mentioned earlier, the bonus show is one of the many member benefits for signing up on our website, joinpacman.com. Sign up, and we'll see you in mere moments on the bonus show.
Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Disco delivers affordable science-backed skincare treatments to your home. The Disco Starter Set helps guys fight oily skin and razor burn and keeps your skin hydrated. I've had great results with it. You'll get 30% off at letsdisco.com/Pacman. The link is down below.